Man, is that good? Whew! Eitan Cats, unmistakably. We've been working our way through albums now. We did Shlomo Cats live in Melbourne, and then we did the Moshav Band Shabbat album, Volume 1. And now we're going to work through Eitan Katz live in Jerusalem. He's Shlomo's brother. And it's perfect that we're starting a new album today and that it's Eitan's, who's a personal friend, because I'm going to a live Eitan Katz, I wouldn't call it a concert. It's going to be like a living room concert with some friends. Very excited. Tonight's the night for that. And I mean, he's just going to take us up to another place like he always does. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get together to do some beautiful learning. And tonight we're going to cover a very, very important halachic question, a question of Jewish law that we've kind of been skirting around for these first 11 days of this tractate. Tonight we're going to get to it. Can we carry objects out of the private domain into the public domain and through the public domain on a festival? We're going to get into that tonight. Who is with us as we get together to do some learning on a Sunday night? James in Indianapolis, Yehudit in South Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, Larry in Queens, Lucy in Minnesota, Belle in Illinois, Melissa in Great Neck, Paul in the Great Northwest. I don't understand that comment. Hannah in Queens, Lisa in Muncie, Francisco in California, Paula in Chicago, Tom in PA, Bella in Florida, Deborah saying shalom from San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, Mexico, and there's a Chabad sending greetings to you in Mexico. Beautiful, so glad you're tuning in. Lindsay in Cincinnati, Steve is checking in. Tara in New Jersey, Jean in California, John in Maine. Over there on the YouTube side, John in Sedona, now over on YouTube, Bradford in Dallas, Marjorie in Georgia, Gigi in British Columbia, and Aoife in Ocala, Florida. Welcome, everybody. A very quick thought before we get into our page from Rabbi Yisrael of Salant. He pointed out, Leviticus 19:2, it says, "You shall be holy, for I am holy." Or rather, "You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy." Okay, God is holy. We understand that, right? God is apart from everything. God is infinite. We're not. God is eternal. We're not. God created the universe. We didn't. God is holy. That's simple, easy to understand. How can we be holy? And how can we be holy because God is holy? What does that mean? Explains Rabbi Yisrael of Salant. This verse, "You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy," at Leviticus 19:2, is followed by the commandments, "You shall not steal, you shall not deny falsely, you shall not lie to one another, you shall not cheat your fellow, and you shall not rob, you shall not withhold a worker's wage who's with you until the morning, you shall not commit a perversion of justice, you shall not be a talebearer," meaning you shall not share gossip. "You shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed. You shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge. You shall love your fellow as yourself." It is the observance of these commandments that makes a person holy. It's a good thought. All right. Where are we holding? We are in Tractate Beitzah, the 8th volume of the Talmud. We're studying the laws that are particular to festivals and all the festivals have in common, and which distinguishes festival days from Shabbos and, of course, from weekdays. Generally speaking, the same labors that are prohibited on Shabbos, 39 categories of labor defined by our sages as the categories of labor that were required to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the wilderness, when the children of Israel were wandering the desert for 40 years, and we were instructed to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle. All of the different kinds of labor that were necessary for its construction are the labors that are prohibited on Shabbos. Also prohibited on festivals, with the major exception that we may cook. We may cook our meals on the festival. And now that we're cooking, so we're also going to be permitted to do other kinds of labor that are normally prohibited on Shabbos, but which are not cooking per se, but which are going to be necessary so that we can rejoice on the festival. Rejoice meaning have a festive meal. So, slaughtering is not the same as cooking, but if you don't slaughter the animal and you have no animal, to then butcher and roast and eat on the festival, it's no good for the festival. So the sages say you can slaughter on the festival. And now that we're adding in these other categories, we come to this major question, and we've already started to talk about it, right? We saw that Beis Hillel, who disagree with Beis Shammai more stringent, Beis Hillel more lenient, and we follow Beis Hillel, said that you can bring the butcher who's carrying his butcher knife to the place where the animal stands to be slaughtered and then cooked and eaten on the festival. How is the butcher going to get there with his knife? He's going to walk through the public domain. So now he's going to be carrying that knife through the public domain. So we've already seen that one can carry for the purpose of food preparation. Now our Mishnah is going to ask, tonight's Mishnah, Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Beitzah, what about other kinds of carrying on the festival which are not related to food preparation? Is that going to be permitted? One might think, no, we were given this permit to carry things or to slaughter or to do what's necessary so that we can cook on the festival and have the festive meal. Why should that permit extend to carrying for other purposes? And the answer is that it does. It is not a blanket permission, as we shall see. Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 1. Let me line that up. Okay. Beis Shammai say, one may carry out on a festival neither a minor child, nor a lulav that we carry on sukkahs, nor a Torah scroll into the public domain, as none of these are required for the preparation of food. And Beis Hillel permit. They allow that. And the law follows Beis Hillel. Is a Torah scroll involved in food preparation? Of course not. Carrying a minor child through the public domain? Not related to food preparation. Carrying the lulav, which is part of the 4 species that we wave on Sukkot, not for food preparation. So we understand why Beis Shammai say no. Question is, why does Beis Hillel say yes? Why should we be permitted to carry these things? The Gemara starts addressing this question. The Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, who reviews Mishnayos, teaches a Baraisa before Rav Yitzhak bar Avdimi, one who slaughters a gift offering on a festival is flogged for transgressing the prohibition, no manner of work shall be done on them. Since this slaughtering was not performed for the purpose of eating, the action constitutes a prohibited labor on a festival. Hold on a second. Yeah, an ola, an elevation offering, the kind of offering that you just offer freely to God, and after it is slaughtered and it's put up on the altar when the temple is standing, it is consumed entirely on the altar. So no one is eating it. That's the point of this type of offering. We don't make sacrifices since the temple was destroyed, but when the temple was standing, this is the type of offering that did not involve eating. As opposed to the shalamim, the peace offerings, where part of those were eaten by the people, part of it went up on the altar. But here, there's no active eating involved. It all goes up in a pleasing aroma to God, but there's no eating. So some sage suggested, okay, well, this is a violation because the slaughtering that was done for the purpose of bringing that offering in the temple was not necessary for any act of eating by people on the festival, and so it shouldn't have been done. Slaughter should only be permitted for the purpose of eating, for people eating, for Jews eating on the festival. Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi said to that Tana, who could have said this baraisa to you? It is evidently in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai, who say that we do not say, since carrying out was permitted on a festival for the purpose of food preparation, it was also permitted not for that purpose. That seems to be the position of Beis Hillel. If carrying was permitted for food preparation, it's also going to be permitted for other purposes, since in our Mishna, Beis Hillel permit carrying a child, carrying a lulav, carrying a Sefer Torah scroll through the public domain. So it must be Beis Shammai who say, well, just because carrying is permitted for food preparation, it's not going to be permitted for other things. Likewise, slaughtering is going to be permitted for food preparation, not going to be permitted for other purposes, even a holy purpose like bringing a sacrifice up on the altar, according to this understanding of Beis Shammai. For if you say that this baraisa that's now being cited about it's not permitted to slaughter in order to bring an elevation offering in the temple, for if you say that this baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, well, they say, since carrying out was permitted for the requirements of food preparation, it is also permitted for other kinds of requirements. And here too, with regard to the prohibited labor of slaughtering, since slaughter was permitted for the requirements of food preparation, it is also permitted for other requirements like bringing an elevation offering on the altar. Rabbah strongly objects to this reasoning. From where do you infer that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagree over this issue? Perhaps they disagree only over the following. The laws of Erev and the prohibition against carrying out apply to Shabbos. But there are no laws of Erev nor a prohibition against carrying on a festival. So perhaps, Rabbah is suggesting, it may be that Beis Shammai say, just like you can't carry on Shabbos, you can't carry on a festival, and we're going to make an exception when it comes to carrying for the purpose of food preparation. But perhaps Beis Hillel hold you can carry anything on a festival, and there's no prohibition against carrying on a festival, the way that there is a prohibition on carrying on Shabbos. Perhaps there's no prohibition against carrying at all. You can carry anything you want. It's like a weekday. Now, the Gemara clarifies the dispute according to this explanation. We're not saying this is the final word, but according to this explanation, one sage, Beis Shammai, holds that the laws of Erev and the prohibition against carrying out apply to Shabbos, and similarly, the laws of Erev and carrying out apply to a festival. And the only difference is that on the festival, carrying, like other types of prohibited labor, is permitted for food preparation. And the other sage, Beis Hillel, holds that the laws of Erev and prohibition against carrying out apply only to Shabbos, but there are no laws of Erev nor a prohibition against carrying out from the private domain to the public domain on a festival. As it is written, Jeremiah 17:22, neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Shabbos day, from which Beis Hillel inferred on Shabbos. Yes, carrying from one domain to another is indeed prohibited. On a festival, no, it is not prohibited. According to this explanation, and it's not the final word, but according to this explanation, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not disagree about whether a prohibited labor that is permitted for the purpose of food preparation on a festival is also permitted when it does not serve that purpose. Rather, they disagree on whether there's any prohibition on carrying on a festival. Beis Shammai say, of course you can't carry on a festival. Beis Hillel say you can carry on a festival, according to this explanation. Rav Yosef strongly objects to this explanation by Rabbah. However, if that is so, that the dispute is whether the prohibition against carrying applies on a festival, well then Beis Hillel should permit one to move muktzah objects. items that are set aside because they have no permitted use on the festival. This is actually a prohibition. The prohibition of handling muktzah, set aside items, is an extension of the prohibition against carrying out. Now, I'm not sure that all agree about that, right? Because one understanding of muktzah is you shouldn't handle objects that have no permitted use on Shabbos, because in handling them, you may come to use them for the prohibited purpose, and then you would violate Shabbos by doing some kind of work that you're not supposed to do. Saying that muktzah is explained solely as an extension of the prohibition of carrying out, okay, maybe, I'm not sure about that. But assuming that it is, assuming that carrying is, directly related to the prohibition on handling muktzah, so consequently, let them differ with regard to whether or not it is permitted to carry out stones on a festival. Now, stones are muktzah. There's no reason why you should be handling rocks or dirt, for that matter, except, to cover something that's gross, or to cover blood. If you slaughtered an undomesticated kosher animal on a festival, you need that dirt to cover the blood. But generally speaking, stones and pebbles and dirt are muktzah items on Shabbos and Yom Tov. You shouldn't be handling them because really they're part of construction, and you shouldn't be handling them at all. Like gravel, don't handle that stuff. Don't touch it. Right. So if Beis Hillel agreed that all carrying is permitted on a festival, just like on a weekday, then you might think that they would say, well, you can handle stones as well. But we know that Beis Hillel do prohibit handling stones, which are muktzah, and so therefore they do hold by muktzah. Items that are set aside should not be touched on a festival. And therefore, since in this explanation muktzah and carrying are directly connected, it must be that Beis Hillel do have an issue with carrying. They don't have a blanket permission that you could carry anything you want on a festival. Everyone agrees that conclude from this, everyone agrees that carrying out is prohibited on a festival, and the Torah permitted it only when it is necessary for food preparation and eating. So instead, according to Rav Yosef, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagree with regard to carrying out that is not for the purpose of food preparation. According to the opinion of Beis Hillel, since carrying out is permitted for the sake of sustenance, it is entirely permitted. According to Beis Shammai, the sages permitted only labor that serves the purpose of food preparation. And the Gemara comments, and Rabbi Yochanan also holds that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagree with regard to the principle, since carrying out is permitted on a festival for the purpose of food preparation, it is also permitted not for this purpose, meaning for all other purposes. Not for this does it mean for all other purposes, or does it simply mean for some other purposes that are not food preparation? That's the question we're really asking. As the Tana teaches a baraisa in front of Rabbi Yochanan, one who cooks the sciatic nerve in milk on a festival and eats it is flogged for violating 5 distinct prohibitions. This is one of those Talmudic teaching tools, right? They're going to say that if you cook the sciatic nerve, which is a part of the cow, which is prohibited for a Jew to eat, but it's part of a cow, if you cook it in milk, right, you know that you can't cook meat and milk together. That violates, a Torah law of kashrus. So if you do that on a festival, how many different sins have you committed? In clarifying how many sins you've committed, we're actually going to address this question of what is permitted and what is not permitted on a festival. We're going to work our way back to, okay, what kinds of carrying are permitted and what are not on a festival. We're getting there. So, using this teaching tool, if a person cooked the sciatic nerve of a cow in milk on a festival, how many different sins has he committed? How many different sets of lashes will he receive? He's flogged for violating these Torah laws. How many sets of lashes is he going to receive? Says the Gemara, 5. He committed 5 separate transgressions. What are they? Number 1, he is flogged due to the prohibition of cooking the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve, a Jew can't eat it. We can cook on the festival. Why? Because we're going to eat the food that we cook on the festival. Since you can't eat the sciatic nerve, cooking it on a festival is a transgression. Number 2, he is flogged due to the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve. Okay, so it says that he cooked the sciatic nerve in milk and he eats it. That's going to lead to him being 5 sets of lashes. So number 2, he's flogged because he eats the sciatic nerve. Number 3, he's flogged due to the prohibition of cooking meat and milk together. Number 4, he is flogged due to the prohibition of eating meat that is cooked in milk, right? It's a different prohibition. You're prohibited to cook milk and meat together, even if you don't eat it. And of course, you're prohibited to eat milk and meat together. So that's 4. And number 5, lastly, he is flogged due to the prohibition of kindling a fire on a festival. Can you kindle a fire on a festival? Yes, to light your oven so that you can prepare food to eat on the festival. Since you're not permitted to eat this food, the sciatic nerve cooked in milk, kindling a fire to cook that prohibited food now becomes a transgression, and those are 5 sets of lashes. Now we analyze the assumptions that were made in coming to this number of 5 sets of lashes. Rabbi Yochanan said to the Tana, leave and teach it outside. In other words, this Beitzah that you're teaching is not fit for discussion in the study hall. You've got the law all wrong. The opinion that there is a prohibition against kindling and cooking on a festival is not a Mishna worthy of serious consideration. Obviously, you can cook on a festival. And if you say that it is a Mishna rather than an error, well, this statement is still not in accordance with the law, as it is following the opinion of Beis Shammai, who say, we do not say that since carrying out was permitted on a festival for the purposes of food preparation, it was also permitted when performed not for these purposes. Here, too, we do not say since kindling was permitted on a festival for the purposes of food preparation, it was also permitted when performed not for these purposes. And the Gemara explains why the Beitzah cannot be attributed to Beis Hillel. If one were to suggest that this Beitzah follows the opinion of Beis Hillel, this cannot be the case, as they say, since carrying out was permitted for the purposes of food preparation, it was also permitted when not performed for those purposes. Here too, since kindling was permitted for purposes of food preparation, it was also permitted when performed not for these purposes. Therefore, according to the opinion of Beis Hillel, kindling cannot be included among those prohibitions for which one is liable on a festival. Now that you've established that kindling is valid for food preparation purposes, you are going to be able to kindle for other purposes. You're going to be able to carry for other purposes. Activities that are permitted for food preparation, according to Beis Hillel, are going to be permitted for other purposes on a festival. All other purposes? What is the law? Carrying out on a festival. The law is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel. Since carrying out, meaning carrying objects from the private domain out to the public domain, or carrying more than 4 cubits in the public domain, or carrying from the public domain into the private domain. Since carrying out is permitted for the requirements of food preparation, it is also permitted for other purposes. Consequently, it is permitted to carry out a child, a Torah scroll, or vessels to the public domain. Some authorities say that it is proper to refrain from removing items that serve no purpose of the festival at all. It also says, on a festival, now this is Rav Steinsaltz explaining for us. On a festival, labors necessary for the preparation of food are expressly permitted by the Torah. Now, the Gemara states that the principle that an action that is permitted for the purpose of food preparation is permitted even when it is being performed for a different purpose. Both early and later authorities discuss at length the question of whether this principle is to be understood as a blanket permission. One opinion is that there is no difference between a festival and a weekday with regard to these labors. When the sages did not apply this principle, but rather prohibited certain actions, they did so as a safeguard for Torah prohibitions. Another opinion is that the prohibition remains in place and it is merely overruled by the needs of the celebration of a festival. Consequently, it remains in force when there is no reason to permit it. Right? According to one view, no, since you can carry for the purpose of food preparation, you can carry for other purposes as well. According to the other view, we permit carrying for the purposes of food preparation. We're going to permit carrying for other purposes as well, but those purposes should be related to the festival. The examples given in our Mishnah, carrying a young child, like to a circumcision or to synagogue or to the celebration so that the mom can be there too, or the whole family can be together. Carrying a lulav, that's definitely related to the celebration of Sukkot, on the festival of Sukkot. Carrying a Torah scroll, obviously is being carried to the synagogue so that it can be read, or perhaps it's being carried from the synagogue to the home of a person who's sick, who can't make it to the synagogue, so that he can hear the Torah reading on that day. All of these examples suggest that we'll allow these labors to be done on the festival for needs related to the festival. Rabbeinu Tam accepts this latter understanding. However, he maintains that it is permitted to carry a child because not doing so will cause suffering. It may be suggested that the justification for the permission to sacrifice the gift offering that was mentioned in the Gemara, that it is permitted, it absolutely is permitted to slaughter an animal for an olah, for an elevation offering in the temple. Nobody will eat any of it. It goes up in smoke and a pleasing aroma to God. In a sense, it's feeding God. God doesn't need to eat our sacrifices. Obviously, the reason we perform the sacrifices is because God asked us to, and it makes God happy when we do his will. That's why we do it. So even though there's no active eating, it is permitted to slaughter and to bring gift offerings in the temple. Why? So that your table should not be full while that of your master is empty. This means that one should not satisfy his needs while the altar is neglected. Rather, the festival is fully joyful when offerings are sacrificed on the altar. So, there's a lot of nuance in this body of law. If you're not sure whether an act of carrying or kindling a fire or, some other labor that is normally prohibited on Shabbos, whether it's prohibited on a festival or not, in your community, you should check with your rabbi. But the general principle is, and I just read this on the Orthodox Union site, on the OU site, is carrying, let's just stick with carrying objects through the public domain in the absence of an Erev. Like when there's an Erev, you can carry, just like you can carry around your house. But when there's no Erev, can you carry on a festival the way that you can't on Shabbos? But you can on a festival? Only if what you're carrying is somehow going to assist in the celebration of the festival. It is related to the needs of the festival. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7. I'm going to read Mishnah number 8, and then we're just going to cover a few ideas related to it, and then I'm coming to comments and questions. Mishnah number 8 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Beitzah. We're on the B side of page 12. The separation of challah is permitted on a festival. We talked about this before. Challah, we think of as the bread that we eat at our table on Friday nights, Shabbos dinner. But what challah really means is the separation of a piece of the dough. When you're baking bread, you separate some of it for the priest, right? This was an obligation when the temple was standing, sacrifices were being brought, and every time you baked a minimum amount of bread, you set aside some of that dough to give to the Kohen, to give to the priest. And there were other priestly gifts that are not related to the sacrifices, by the way. Like just whenever you're baking at home or a commercial baker, he's setting aside challah for the priest. And when you slaughter an animal, there are certain priestly gifts. I'll have them in a moment, but the priestly gifts it just includes certain parts of the animal that you slaughter. The foreleg, the jaw, the maw, I think something like that. We'll get to it. Okay, so the separation of challah is permitted on a festival, as one is permitted to prepare dough and bake it on a festival. And bread may not be eaten without first separating challah. Now that the temple is not standing, still, when you make 5 pounds of flour and make challah out of it, Nina separates, a piece of dough and she puts it away. Now don't give it to priests in modern times, so it has to be burned. And the time to burn it actually is when you're burning the chametz before Passover. So she's got a bunch of these little balls that were set aside and waiting for that. At any rate, on a festival, you can knead dough, right? Separate the challah and bake it, and then eat that bread on the festival. Why would this even be a question? Because separating tides or separating the edible from the inedible is generally prohibited on Shabbos because it's a form of threshing, separating the edible from the inedible, or separating tides. That's prohibited on Shabbos. Beis Shammai say, one may not bring this separated challah or any of the other priestly gifts, i.e. the foreleg, the jaw, and the maw of a slaughtered animal, to a priest on a festival, though it is permitted to separate them from an animal being slaughtered on a festival. In other words, okay, so you slaughter an animal, you can do that. We've talked about it repeatedly, so that you can then butcher it, roast it, and eat it. You're going to separate those priestly gifts. Do you have to carry those priestly gifts through the public domain and give it to the priest on the festival? Beis Shammai say no. Once you separated those gifts, you can wait till after the festival to give it to your friend the priest. You don't have to walk through the public domain now. This is consistent with Beis Shammai's opinion that you shouldn't carry through the public domain unless it's directly related to food preparation. This is not. You've already separated those objects. It's not. You don't need them for your food preparation. And this is prohibited regardless of whether they were separated yesterday before the festival started or whether they were separated today during the festival. And Beis Hillel permit it. They permit you to carry these gifts to the priest. Similar to that same principle. Will your table be full when your master's is empty? We look up to the priests, right? The priestly class in our society, who, at least when the temple was standing, right, they would bless us by doing the divine worship, the avodah in the temple, and they should be provided for. The Torah tells us that the priest should be provided for because the priest did not receive a portion of land, neither did the Levite. That's why we have tithes. Beis Shammai said to Beis Hillel, this halacha, this law, can be derived by an analogy. Challah, what? Nina, if you're watching, I need a glass of water, please. Beis Shammai say, one may not bring, where am I? And Beis Shammai said to Beis Hillel, this law can be derived by an analogy. Challah and other gifts are both considered a gift to the priest. And likewise, teruma, the first tithe, when you're separating produce, is also a gift to the priest. And just as you agree that one may not bring teruma, the first tithe, to a priest on a festival, so too one should not transport, one should not carry those gifts through the public domain to bring it to the priest. Beis Hillel said to them, thank you so much. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haMashiach, kol nehiyeh v'ra. Very hot in LA today. I'm a bit dehydrated. Okay. Beis Hillel said to them, no, this analogy is incorrect. If you said that you derive the halacha from teruma, where its separation is not allowed on the festival, you can't separate teruma on a festival. How will you say the same with regard to the gifts from an animal or challah, concerning which their separation is allowed on the festival because it's directly related to food preparation? Since it is not prohibited to separate these gifts, they may likewise be brought to a priest on the festival. That's the Mishnah. Priestly gifts, what are they? As noted in this context, the priestly gifts refer to the foreleg, the jaw, and the maw. the Torah commands that these portions be given to a priest when non-sacrificial animals, for example, cattle, sheep, and goats, that are used for consumption, are slaughtered. No sanctity is attached to these gifts. Therefore, once they have been given to the priest may give or sell them to a non-priest. What is the law with regard to bringing challah and gifts on a festival? Not only can you bring the challah dough, the separated dough, and these priestly gifts from the slaughtered animals, but also teruma and tithes that are separated before the festivals start. They can be transported. Terumos and tithes separated before the festival started, because you can't separate tithes during the festival, but terumos that were separated before the festival, and all the more so, challah, or the priestly gifts that were separated during the festival, may be brought to a priest during the festival. This law is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, as explained by Rabbi Yosef. If one is in a place where no priest is available, where the custom is to burn the challah, he may still separate challah from the dough that was kneaded on a festival. Kneaded, like kneading the dough like that. And we go to the Gemara, and Rabbi Yosef explains, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not dispute about the fact that one may bring gifts from an animal to a priest on a festival. They disputed only with regard to teruma. As Beis Shammai say, one may not bring it, and Beis Hillel say, one may even bring teruma. And Beis Hillel would reason as follows: challah and gifts are a gift to the priest, and teruma is a gift to the priest. Just as one may bring the other gifts on a festival, so too one may bring teruma. Beis Shammai said to them, no, if you said so with regard to other gifts concerning which their separation is allowed on the festival, will you say the same with regard to teruma, whose separation is not allowed? And Rabbi Yehuda said, and Shmuel said, that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef and his understanding of how Beis Hillel ruled, and the law follows Beis Hillel, and we are permitted to transport during the festival the gifts to the priest, even the teruma and tithes, as long as they were separated before the festival began. That's where we're going to cut off today. Going to cut questions and comments. Tom Beck. Is anything in Judaism ever the final word? You know, one thing that we're seeing when we're talking, there's a saying in yeshivas. I didn't go to yeshiva, but I've heard this saying often enough. We don't paskin halacha from the Gemara. What does that mean? Right? When we read these arguments between the various sages, and sometimes we see there's a dispute between the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishna, and then that dispute doesn't get resolved, or maybe it does get resolved, but then it gets opened up again by the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Talmud. Sometimes it gets resolved, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it even says, and the halacha is like such and such. Usually, when the Talmud actually says, and the law is according to so-and-so, that ends up being the law. But sometimes, things came up later in light of which the law had to change for policy reasons, etc. Then comes the Rambam 1,000 years later, right? Maimonides, right, who's teaching and writing in the 1200s, I believe. And he tries to codify Jewish law in the Mishnah Torah and delineate what all the mitzvahs are. But there's still going to be questions of law that aren't fully handled by Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah. So along comes the Shulchan Aruch, right? In the 1500s, right? And then there's going to be that's a Sephardic version, and then there's going to be an Ashkenaz version. And Jewish law, for most questions, is pretty much settled, the final word, by about the 1500s. Except for all these, new technologies and new questions and different situations that could never have been addressed by earlier sages, and that, keep our modern sages busy. And there are questions that we need rulings on because, it's a case of first impression. Technology, etc., causes questions that were never asked before. But as soon as something was authoritative and there was no reason to change it, it doesn't change, right? So we have the final word on many things, but it's not so often, but sometimes it's not so easy to know what the final word is. And we're going to see that in different streams of Judaism. There's going to be a little bit of variation. Certainly when it comes to customs, a lot of variation between Northern European Jews, Southern European Jews, Eastern Jews, etc. But your comment is well put. And finally, Sharon, I understand that slaughtering was permitted when there was no refrigeration and freezers. So is slaughtering still permitted as we can have meat without slaughtering it on the same day? I'm not a rabbi. I can't be 100% sure, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, you can slaughter. You could slaughter because even back then, it wasn't so that the meat would be fresh, right? They could have easily slaughtered before the festival, salted it a bit, and like it would have been fine. It was just one day, They could have kept it cool in a cool place. I don't think that it was going to spoil that quickly. But the permission is, if it's related to food preparation, it's allowed. So slaughtering is allowed. And since that permission goes a lot further, it's even beyond food preparation. It seems like to me it would violate the spirit of these laws to say, well, now we have refrigerators, so you don't need to slaughter. So that would be prohibited. What certainly has happened is, we're all so far removed from, where and when and how animals are slaughtered. We're just accustomed to buying everything in little styrofoam boxes from the supermarket or from the butcher. But if we were more rural, if we lived on or near a farm and we're accustomed to seeing animals slaughtered, I think I'm sure it gets done. There's definitely farm communities in Israel that are religious farm communities. I bet they are slaughtering and roasting animals on the festival. Somebody knows specifically of something like that, let me know. I'd be curious to hear more about it. Okay, that's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday night, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, during the warm-up. The countdown. We'll hear, the next song on Eitan Katz's album, Live in Jerusalem. And perhaps, if it works out, if the Wi-Fi is there, if I can get a good angle, I'll try to stream live from this little living room concert that I'll be at tonight. No promises, but I'll try. Have a great night.